Hey, sixth graders. I had an unexpected situation come up, so I can't be there unexpectedly, but I know you guys are going to be amazing and show our sub what amazing students you are. We've been working on adding and subtracting with decimals, but today we're going to transition from adding and subtracting into multiplying. And the way that we're going to multiply our decimals today is through something called area model. You guys have been using area model to multiply since you were in fourth grade. In fourth grade, that's how they introduced the idea of multiplying numbers that had more than one digit. We're also going to use area model to help us figure out how to multiply numbers that have decimals in them. But to start, let's remind ourselves of how we use area model with whole numbers. We're going to look at multiplying these two numbers. So this rectangle is 18 by 14, and we want to know how many squares are inside it. And so I'm going to set up the area model. To do that, I have to break each of my numbers into place values. So I'm going to start with 18, and I'm going to say, okay, 18, if I draw a line right there, that means I have 10 here, and I have 8 here. For 14, I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to set it up over on the side. Again, breaking it into place values, I have a 10, and I have a 4. Okay, so I've just taken these numbers, again, broken them apart by place value. You'll now notice I have 4 different rectangles. So to find the area of them, I'm going to look at each individual rectangle, and I'm going to multiply my base and my height. So for instance, if I'm looking at this first one, I know my base is 10 and my height is 10, which means the area of just that rectangle is going to be 100. I'm going to move to the second rectangle. This time you'll notice my base has changed. My base is now 8, but my height has not changed. It's still just 10. So 8 times 10, I know, is 80. Move to the third rectangle. Again, dimensions have changed. My base goes back to being 10, but my height is now only 4. 10 times 4 is 40. Last rectangle. This one, again, my base is 8, and my height is 4. 8 times 4 is 32. Now that I've found the area of each individual rectangle, I can find the area of the entire big 18 by 14 rectangle by adding up the areas that I found. So 180, 40, 32. If I add those up, I end up with 252. So 18 times 14 I have found is 252. Okay, so that's helped me find the area of that. But what happens if the numbers have decimals in them? Let's say that instead of 18 times 14, I'm now looking at 1 and 8 tenths times 1 and 4 tenths. Can I use the same method? Yes, you absolutely can. And it's set up much the same way. I'm still going to break it into 4 different rectangles. Only this time the numbers, as I break it into place values, the numbers are slightly different because I'm now going to have numbers that are in decimals. So looking at my first number, I have 1 and 8 tenths. That means I have a whole number 1, and I have 8 tenths. Looking at my second number, I have the whole number 1, and I now have 4 tenths. Again, just like we did before, I'm going to now multiply base times height for each of these 4 rectangles. So I have a base of 1 and a height of 1, which means the area of this one rectangle is just 1. Now, my base is 8 tenths times my height of 1. One set of 8 tenths is just 8 tenths. Third rectangle, I have a base of 1. I now have a height of 4 tenths. 1 times 4/10 is 4/10. Lastly, I have a base of 8/10 and I have a height of 4/10. Here's where it gets slightly tricky. I know what 8 times 4 is. 8 times 4 is 32. But I now have numbers that are behind a decimal point. And that decimal point has to be reflected in my answer. With these previous rectangles, I had one number behind a decimal point, which means in my answer I had one number behind a decimal point. Same with this. No decimal point there, one number behind a decimal point here, so one number behind a decimal point there. How many digits do I have behind a decimal point in this problem? Well, I have one right there, and I have one right there. So I have a total of 2. That means from the end of my answer, I need to put 2 numbers behind a decimal point. So 8/10 times 4/10 gives me the answer of 32 hundredths. Now, same policy, I'm going to add them up. But now I really have to pay attention to place value because I'm dealing with both whole numbers and decimal numbers. I know from our work we've done earlier, whole numbers do have a decimal. We just typically don't write it. Okay, so the whole number 1 has a decimal right there and zeros behind it. Now I know in order to add them, I have to stack my decimals. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to stack up my decimals. And then any number that is missing a digit, like there should be something here because there's a 2 there. I'm going to put zeros in. That doesn't change the value of that 8 and that 4, but it makes it so that my place values are still lined up. So I still have 2 and 15 and 2. So I end up with 252 like I did last time, but this time I have to leave my decimal in the same place value. So 1 and 8/10 times 1 and 4/10 is 2 and 52 hundredths. Similar to what we did when we were using whole numbers, you now just have to add in those decimal points that you were working with. Now that you've seen an example of that, you're going to go through, and through the rest of this Pear Deck, you're going to get an example, an opportunity to practice this. You're going to start with slide 1, which you'll notice the area model is pretty much set up for you. You just have to do the multiplication and the addition of the 4 areas. On page 2, still has some parts of your area model, but you'll notice it no longer gives you what numbers you are multiplying. So I'm going to have to take this and I'm going to have to break that down into those place values. On slide 3, even less help. You just now have a big rectangle. You have to break it into the 4 individual parts and break the numbers into place values to multiply and then add together. You're going to go through all of that. If you finish all of those, you're going to start working on Delta Math. If you are done with Delta Math, the last thing you're going to do is this exit ticket. This exit ticket is going to be graded. This is going to tell us how well you paid attention during our lesson today and how much you're trying. As you go through this slideshow, make sure that you're asking questions of either your neighbor next to you or of our sub if you have questions or are not understanding something. Be awesome. Represent yourself, your family, and Carmody well to our sub. Make sure that she knows she is a valued visitor in our room. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.